Hello, my name is Anthony Heaford and this is my testimony. The United States of America, June 1997. My premonition and warnings. 11th of June 1997. Flying from Boston to Toronto. Sitting just metres from an open cockpit door, I perceived how easily an aeroplane could be hijacked and turned into a kamikaze piloted missile. "11th of June 1997, Logan Airport, Boston. A few minutes before departure, I warned the flight crew that there were no passenger security checks at the airport, literally none. I was told,
"Don't worry, that's normal."
The 12th of June 1997, a factory in Toronto. I told the factory manager that a flight leaving Logan Airport, Boston, would very likely be hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. I was told my urgent warning would be passed to the security services. 2nd of December 1997, a factory in New York. I asked the business owner to warn authorities that terrorists will hijack a civilian airliner and crash it into the World Trade Center. I was told my warning would be passed to the security services. 23rd of September 1997, a factory in Yemen. A machine operator asked me about travel in the US, and I cautioned him about my World Trade Center attack prediction. I now think that factory was a front for Al-Qaeda operations. Was Al-Qaeda in Yemen? Yes. Barbara Bodine, the former US ambassador to Yemen, said,
"When I got there in 1997, there was already an Al-Qaeda presence. We knew about it. The Yemenis knew about it. Everyone knew about it."
The former ambassador also said,
"One of the best ways to describe the presence is that they were largely warehousing lower-level foreign nationals in peripheral areas."
Why was I in Yemen? I was an international field service technician in 1997. That's why I was flying from Boston to Toronto. It's also why I was in Brooklyn, New York. And it's why, in September 1997, I was visiting a new customer in Yemen on a 6-day business trip to a factory in Taiz. Aden is 2 hours drive south, and Sana'a is 5 hours drive north. My destination in Taiz was a new printing factory called YemPak. I was told the business name YemPak is an abbreviation of Yemen and Pakistan. I now think YemPak was a front company for Al-Qaeda's global operations. The factory building was inside a large defensive compound occupying a hilltop on the city's eastern perimeter. A second hilltop was occupied by a Republican Guard garrison, signifying the strategic location of the YemPak factory. The building was inside a compound that did and still does belong to the HSA Group. The $10 billion per annum global conglomerate is privately owned by one Yemeni family. There is an expansive HSA industrial estate within a few miles of Taiz, with an established printing division already. Another technician had installed a machine hit there 2 years previously. So why the HSA Group would build a lone printing factory within its own secure headquarters compound is curious. The typical end use for this kind of printing is flexible food packaging, crisp packets, candy bar wrappers, virtually any packaging you'd see in a supermarket, in fact. None of the YemPak employees had any previous experience in printing, and YemPak appeared to have no product to produce. It all seemed quite odd given the $3 million investment someone had made in YemPak. In 2015, the compound was labelled Security Central on Google Maps. Using Google Earth historical images, it is possible to track the progress of the battle for the Security Central compound. This is a very significant location, judging by the battle damage. Since the Saudi-led invasion began, ground and air attacks have destroyed almost every building in the compound, and numerous breaches are visible in the security wall. The only building not to be hit is the mosque and school building by the compound's entrance. This was the madrasa the YemPak employees told me they attended for lessons. But in 1997 there were no signs of war. I was a field service technician and I had a job to do. I had a customer to please. The 20th to the 24th of September 1997, inside the YemPak factory in Taiz, Yemen. The machine operator I was training asked me about travel in the US. I cautioned him about my World Trade Center attack prediction. Later, the second operator I was training asked me about my attack prediction. I gave him the same caution I repeated to anyone who would listen. I told him I thought the same group that bombed the World Trade Center in 1993 would try again. I said they would use hijacked aeroplanes as missiles to strike the building. I warned him that this could happen at any moment on almost any flight. These conversations lasted a few minutes and they were not discussions, just travel advice and warnings, nothing more. The machine operators identified themselves and the compound security guards as Pakistani nationals. They told me about the school they attended in the compound and explained the YemPak company name meaning two, a Yemeni-Pakistani collaboration. The operators would not give me their names for my installation records, and I was only allowed to take this picture if I promised not to photograph the operator's face. Based on the circumstances of our meeting, I now think the machine operators and security guards were the Al-Qaeda members in Yemen that the US ambassador described as
Low-level foreign nationals were housed in peripheral areas.
The machine operators introduced me to the factory mechanic who they called Dino. I sensed this was a derogatory nickname the mechanic bore reluctantly. I spent a few hours with Dino, showing him the machine's setup and maintenance. We did not speak about travelling in the US or about my attack prediction. I now believe Dino is Ahmed al-Darbi, a Saudi national recently convicted of Al-Qaeda membership and of planning attacks on targets in Yemen. My assertion is based on the circumstances of our meeting, certain facial similarities, and the nickname connection too. Ahmed al-Darbi was the mechanic for Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Dino was a mechanic at an Al-Qaeda front company in Yemen, the YemPak factory. In 1997, a quarter of the YemPak factory building was occupied by brick-built offices. Today, that quarter of the building is the only part left standing. I was strictly banned from entering the offices, told other dangerous installation work was being carried out, and that there were wires everywhere. A one-day service visit to an existing machine on the nearby HSA industrial estate was cancelled by the customer without reason. Instead, my visit to the YemPak factory was extended by 1 day despite there being no work left to do, something I had made very clear to the customer already. 25th of September 1997 in the morning. On my arrival at YemPak 5 days earlier, I was briefly introduced to the chief, Mr. Saeed, in the main office block of the compound. On the 25th, Mr. Saeed visited me in the YemPak factory. We spoke briefly before he asked me to confirm my World Trade Center attack prediction, which I did. Mr. Saeed then gave me the afternoon off, after telling me a man would come to my hotel that evening to join me for dinner. "25th of September, in the evening. A man came to my hotel about 5 p.m. He introduced himself as Youssef and invited me to walk to a viewpoint overlooking the ancient city. We talked about my work and family before being distracted by some children. After sunset, we walked back to my hotel, where we shared dinner. Youssef was good company. He spoke English naturally, and we talked for over an hour. We discussed travel, news and politics, and I repeated my World Trade Center attack prediction. We agreed it would be an abhorrent act of mass murder, but that unless US foreign policy or domestic security changed drastically, someone would do it. Youssef left the hotel after dinner, and that is the only time I have met or spoken with him. 4 face recognition programs have matched Youssef's face to that of Yemeni Al-Qaeda member Ramzi bin al-Shiba, shown on the left-hand side in this online comparison. 2 Apple Mac facial recognition programs also match Ramzi and Youssef's faces. Ramzi is a Yemeni citizen currently held in Guantanamo Bay prison, charged with being a principal architect behind the 9/11 attacks. Given the circumstances of our meeting and the facial recognition software matches, I think Ramzi and Youssef are very likely to be close blood relatives, brothers or cousins. I believe dinner with Youssef was arranged in light of my previous conversations with the machine operators in the YemPak factory. I now think Youssef was security vetting me before 2 bigger meetings already planned for the next day. The 26th of September 1997, in the morning. I should have left Taiz by 8 a.m. for my flight to Sana'a, but at 9 a.m. I was still waiting in the YemPak factory for a final machine acceptance signature from the customer. Finally, I was taken to the main office block where bizarrely a group photo was being convened by Mr. Saeed, the chief. After insisting I dress in traditional Yemeni clothes, Mr. Saeed introduced the man with the moustache who'd entered the room after me. "This is the engineer," he said. I asked why we had not been introduced before, and Mr. Saeed answered, "He is working on other projects." The photos were taken, and the engineer disappeared as quickly as he'd appeared. He did not speak to me or shake my hand, and I left without further ceremony, my machine acceptance form signed. I now have no doubt that the engineer was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I base this assertion on the circumstances of our meeting, a general physical resemblance, and specifically the name. The engineer was KSM's nickname within Al-Qaeda, and this man was introduced to me as the engineer. After the photos, it was a senior manager who drove me from the HSA group compound heading north towards Sana'a and my flight home. That manager was Mohammed, shown here. Mohammed and I left the HSA compound in a 4-wheel drive jeep. There was no conversation as we left Taiz. Mohammed was focused on the road and I was checking my passport and tickets. We passed the HSA industrial estate and Taiz International Airport before Mohammed spoke again. "I am taking you to a meeting," he said. "No, we're already late for my flight," I replied. Mohammed looked at me, smiled, and said, "The plane will wait for you." The town we were supposed to be bypassing was called Al-Qaeda. It appears to be a prosperous town with modern agriculture and impressive infrastructure programs, but our detour avoided all that. We turned right onto a dust track that twisted through tended fields. The track became rougher until we were driving through sand on a dry riverbed. Mohammed's driving became more and more confident until he turned and grinned at me as we took one last turn heading towards a tree line on the right. He turned into what I'd describe as a hidden entrance. Mohammed said nothing and continued driving at a considerable speed. He parked in the shade by the first arrowhead, and got out of the jeep without a word. Mohammed was gone in a moment. Two men I'd never seen before stood in front of the jeep. One gestured to me, and so I got out, and I followed him into a room in the first building. The room was large but sparsely furnished. There was just one long trestle table with seating placed against a back wall, opposite the door we had just come in. I sat down as shown and waited alone, watching the door and wondering what was going on. After about 10 minutes, approximately 10 men entered the room. They were aged from their mid-20s to 50s, I would guess, and I would describe their dress as practical outdoor clothing. They looked very much like the Afghan mujahideen I had seen on the news. I did not stand as they entered the room, and no one spoke. The men sat down and food was served. I started eating immediately, and within a few seconds, a man beside me at the head of the table stood up. The rest of the men did the same, and they swiftly left, all without a word ever being said. Within a minute, I was taken back to the jeep, and a different driver drove me to the airport in Sana'a. True to Mohammed's word, the plane was waiting for me. I sailed through the airport like a VIP, and I walked across a tarmac to a plane already loaded with passengers. We departed as soon as I sat down. During the flight home, I tried to process the week's events. I had no suspicions about YemPak. It was a very well-funded international company that had paid list price on about $3 million worth of printing equipment, all purchased at an international trade show in Chicago in April of 1997. Everyone associated with YemPak was well educated and polite. The group photo did seem odd, but I assumed it was a cultural habit or possibly them just having a laugh at my expense. Dinner with Youssef was a pleasant distraction. None of our conversation pointed towards radicalism or direct action, just a commentary on world events. I'd assumed he was a friend or relative of Mr. Saeed, someone wanting to practice his English skills and show some Yemeni hospitality. Youssef was a gentleman. My what just happened moment was over the diversion at Al-Qaeda town and the abandoned lunch that had just occurred. After some thought, I concluded that it was my ignorance that had spoiled a genuine display of hospitality. As for the plane waiting for me, it was beyond the realms of my imagination that a plane full of passengers had been made to wait. I pushed the thoughts from my mind, embarrassed that I hadn't washed or prayed before eating with men who appeared to be of some significance. I did not think about this visit again till the 11th of September 2001. I predicted the 9/11 attack method. I named the primary target and I identified the group that would carry it out. This claim could be confirmed by tracing the two machine operators or the factory owner, a Mr. Barkochba, of the Brooklyn company where I gave my most specific warning. But even if confirmed, this assertion means nothing. Lots of people predicted the attacks. Lots of people gave lots of warnings too. I was introduced to senior Al-Qaeda members in Yemen in 1997 and an attempt was made to recruit me. The only corroborating evidence I have of this is the photo with Youssef, the only clear photo I have left from my trip. Identifying Youssef is the only way to prove that I was meeting with Al-Qaeda in Yemen. But even if proved, I didn't join Al-Qaeda, I wasn't aware it was Al-Qaeda, I didn't break any laws. Other than an interesting ditty, this really means nothing. I can prove operational links between Al-Qaeda and a $10 billion per annum industrial conglomerate, the HSA Group. It was the chief, Mr. Saeed, in this photo, who after confirming my World Trade Center attack prediction, arranged my dinner meeting with Youssef. It was Mr. Saeed who introduced me to the engineer too. And it was Mr. Saeed's general manager, Mohammed, who took me to the meeting at Al-Qaeda town. Mr. Saeed was a gentleman. He's also a billionaire and a member of one of the most powerful families in Yemen. I do not make these accusations lightly. But I believe Mr. Saeed of the HSA group, who I met in Taiz in 1997, was acting as a key facilitator for the Al-Qaeda group. If we were to put military ranks on the group, I'd say Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was a colonel. That would make Mr. Saeed a general or possibly a field marshal directing operations from above. Senior investigators working for the US military's 9/11 Commission contacted me in March of this year. This email from the 9/11 Commission was copied to James Connell and Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Sterling, two lead attorneys in the defence case. The US Army officer who sent me this email proposed sending a team of his investigators to Manchester to interview me over a 4-day period. I have declined the Pentagon's invitation to interview, citing a lack of confidence in the judicial integrity of the 9/11 Commission. The Commission refuses to even discuss witness status with me. Despite me spending 3 years trying to pass this information to them, when I was finally contacted in March this year, that contact was via Facebook Messenger. In my opinion, the trials being held at Guantanamo Bay are a farce, an utter charade. It's simply an exercise in hiding the truth and protecting those who failed to stop the attacks. So why would the 9/11 Military Commission try to suppress my evidence? It is in the public record that in 1996 the US Embassy in Yemen acted as a personal shopper for the HSA group. The US Embassy sourced a host of industrial chemicals, including sulfur, a primary ingredient of Al-Qaeda's later bomb-making technology. This delivery was supposed to be given for the attention of the general manager at PO Box 5302 Taiz, a man called Mohammed A. Salim. Is it possible that Mohammed A. Salim is the same senior manager, Mohammed, who drove me to Al-Qaeda town in 1997? I think it is. A further investigation of my assertions would raise a question of what former Ambassador Barbara Bodine did about Al-Qaeda's presence in Yemen when she was there. It will also raise a question of why the CIA's Alex station, which was focused on Al-Qaeda in Yemen, has seemingly missed the Al-Qaeda base in Taiz. There is no mention of it anywhere in any report that I have seen. Did the CIA know about this base? I could give half a dozen other examples of suspicious links emanating from the HSA group. The 2002 US Treasury list of entities funding Al-Qaeda is one. This list included a financial shell company in Switzerland called MEGA, and Mr. Saeed of the HSA group was a founding director of this Swiss shell company. Another is the fact that Mr. Saeed of the HSA group is also a founding investor in the Tadhamon International Islamic Bank, an institution known to operate freely in areas under Daesh control in Yemen. People may be interested to know why the HSA Group bought Britain's biggest cardboard packaging company just 14 months after my visit to Yemen. Although I was never involved with this company, this is a business venture that could have profited my former employer greatly. I hope people will ask if Mr. Dan Barkochba of the Brooklyn factory I visited did pass on my very specific warnings, and if so, to whom? Another major question is why, when I passed all this information to UK security services in 2009, they appear to have ignored it. To give that matter some context, the day after I called British security services and told them I had met Al-Qaeda, I joined the British Army. Amongst other roles in the Army, I was a colonel's driver and I was intimately involved in force deployments to Afghanistan. I even served a 6-month tour in Helmand myself, standing next to Prince Harry with a loaded rifle in my hands on numerous occasions. Never once during my first 4 years of military service did anyone think to ask, what about these meetings with Al-Qaeda? Bottom line is I have an incredible amount of 9/11 and Al-Qaeda related intelligence. I will even admit to having met Al-Qaeda member in Morocco some years later. But my problem is no one seems to be interested in these claims. Colonel Poll, the judge presiding over the 9/11 trials, appears to think he can pursue the 9/11 case without acknowledging this testimony. I will give Colonel Poll the courtesy of only calling him a fool. The alternative would be to accuse him of criminal complicity in an attempt to protect those most responsible for the murder of 2,976 people on 9/11. I have spent the last 3 years of my life investigating these matters. I've come to the conclusion that it was me who gave Al-Qaeda the idea of a 9/11 style attack. Prior to 1997, all Al-Qaeda's efforts were focused on bomb making and bomb delivery. That changed in November 1997. Only 37 days after my visit to Yemen, the first visa application connected to the 9/11 attacks was made in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And it was in December 1997 that the former CIA agent Robert Bayer was passed a very specific warning that Al-Qaeda were going to hijack some planes. I hope this testimony will raise enough interest and attention to warrant further investigation of my claims. Thank you for your time.